how are you doing, everybody? Welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Hopefully you are all doing really good. Today's video, as promised, we are going to be talking about the functionality side of the golf swing and what are we trying to do. So this is the last video on the backswing, okay? And we are then going to talk about, next week's playlist is going to be about downswing and impact, and then we're going to start to progress. And I'm going to be, hopefully, in that sort of following week, start to talk more about real case studies of golfers. Now that we are sort of nearing ever so closer out of lockdown, they're going to go and play, and then I'm going to try and sort of document how these golfers should practice and how they should analyse their golf, and that way I'm hoping that's going to be completely much more relatable. But backswing, look, I am very, very flexible, and those people that but I'm very flexible with my approach towards golf coaching, and I'm very happy for golfers to find things on their own accord, and that's absolutely fine. But really, what we're trying to do in the backswing is we are trying to do things like load in the backswing position. We're trying to store energy in the backswing position. We're trying to generate power and find ways to do that. So that's what today's video is going to be about. Now, I know there'll be conflicting messages in here and it'll be different to what you hear elsewhere, but I'm just going to talk about what we need to do, right? And then you guys can sort of, interpret it as you like. So the backswing position, let's concentrate on the hips in the backswing first and foremost. What do we need to do with the hips in the backswing? Well, a bigger question is, again, what are we trying to do, should we say, with the lower body in the backswing position? We know we need to use the ground. Okay, we need to use the ground. How are we going to use the ground? Well, the way you're going to try and use the ground is that your trail leg is going to try and stay flexed. So it's basically going to try and resist against the rotation and the movement of, shall we say, your body and your core. So as your hips make their way to rotate anything from 40 to 60 degrees worth of rotation, the trail leg is standing in its way. And when you sort of shift the pelvis into the leg, you'll trigger a state of internal hip rotation, which means you'll activate muscles in the glute. The glute's a really powerful muscle, right, to store energy and to utilize that coming in towards the start of the downswing. So that's really important, because as we'll talk about in next week, when you start talking about the downswing and the key things for things like rotation is great, but you need to be generating energy, otherwise there's no point moving a certain way. So that's kind of like the first thing to sort of understand, is that one of your intents in the backswing position is to create a load in that sort of glute area, and the way you're going to do that is by, like I said, trying to keep this leg flexed. Now, the first sort of question that you should be asking is, well, okay, well, I hear that I should straighten the leg, and you can straighten your leg, and we do see professional golfers who straighten the leg, but for different reasons, I think. And the reason why we tend to see pros that straighten the leg is quite simply due to the amount of rotation that is occurring. So there's also fantastic examples of touring professionals that keep the right leg very flexed, but the more that you're sort of, if you imagine the pelvis sort of shifts its way behind you, if you like, the deeper the hip rotation is, then the more the leg is going to straighten. But it's not straightening, because we know it can't be completely straightening because of the simple fact that you've got to try and push into the ground. So if you've got to push into the ground, right, to generate energy, which we fundamentally know, then you can't kind of like completely straighten the leg, because you have to push into the ground, and to push into the ground requires an element of flexion so that your foot can push into the floor. So that'd be the first thing. So we know that that's what the hips are trying to do from a rotational perspective. Then the question would be, well, how much? And I think that, what you're trying to do with your upper body is equally the same. You're trying to generate power, and that's why we try and, if we can, get to a sort of 90 degrees worth of shoulder rotation. And you should turn your hips however much you need to facilitate that amount of rotation. So, if somebody's more flexible, then they won't need to move the lower body as much. And if somebody's less flexible, then they'll have to move their lower body more. So that's that sort of next stage. You sort of, that sort of, talking motion and generating additional energy by then using your upper body in that rotational fashion as well. So then the last thing would be, okay, well, we're looking at it from a functional perspective in this video. So the thing that's going to give you arguably, well, possibly the most amount of distance is how much you can move your hands. So you know, if I only have a very short arm swing, as opposed to if I can elevate and move my arm higher in the space to the side of me, then the potentially more powerful that I'm going to become. So then the way that happens is through an element of thoracic mobility. So the more sort of, shall I say, sort of thoracic extension I can create gives me the ability to elevate my arm up. If I take away the thoracic extension, then my hand is inevitably lower. So there's all these sort of things that are potentially going on. And, you know, so many things to think about. I kind of get that. And you should only really tackle this sort of stuff if it's a problem. So a great example is I've got somebody that I can think of off the top of my head that I'm working with online, and they are struggling for distance. So obviously, you know, there's somebody, actually there's two golfers that come to mind in the same, and they've kind of been working on the turn, and they're here, but they're only here. So I've been kind of, you know, giving them to do exercises where they're trying to produce more thoracic extension. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in the backswing position. And plus the other things that we talked about in the playlist, you know, that the arms are trying to create width, and all these things are really true. But I think the easiest way to sort of try and summarize what it is you're trying to do in the backswing position is you are trying to create, you know, activation. You know, your arms are trying to apply width to the swing. Okay, so that's kind of, should we say, storing energy. This is trying to go nice and high, so it gives you a decent amount of, you know, speed to use. This is facilitating this. Okay, I'm pointing to my sort of chest and spine here, if you like. And then this is pushing into this, so that when you start your downswing, you've got something to move into. Like, I've met a couple of people recently, again online, because obviously there's no face-to-face teaching, and you know, they've been kind of straightening the leg to the point where, well, how do you go anywhere? It's like, you know, then what do you do? Like, you know, you can't falsify movement, so you kind of got to imagine that you're like a sprinter in the block in that backswing position, and I think that's a good analogy in terms of how you would use that block to really try and push into. And it's the same sort of relationship with your trail leg, that you're trying to push into the ground as you turn the pelvis into it. So how you move your hips and how your backswing looks is really irrelevant. And I know on the videos I've always talked about hip depth to you guys and getting that hip back, but that's important, but not too pedantically important. Like, I'm okay with a small amount of tolerance as long as that golfer looks like they're producing some level of athleticism and force in that backswing position. That's the key thing. If that golfer stands up a little bit, is that the end of the world? Depends, I suppose, on their consistency, but I wouldn't suggest so. If I've got a golfer who's in a great looking position, but there's nothing there, it's like, well, that's useless, you know. So, as I talked about in the previous video, the only last thing that I would always suggest in the backswing position is to try and rotate around a sort of tilted spine. So when we hit the golf ball, we have to get the shoulder has to come back when we hit the ball, or up if you like, to help the club move through. So therefore, I always kind of suggest to people, you might as well start with a bit of a tilt, rotate around that tilt, and then from there we're going to talk about that sort of downswing motion. But hopefully this video helps, and you know, I think you can do quite a bit of self-discovery on your own really, without being reliant on help, by just doing some basic drills, putting your hands across your shoulders and kind of just working on your rotational movement, because you'll very quickly start to identify how things feel and whether you feel like you're doing enough in the backswing position. And I'd strongly suggest, if you're trying to work on your rotation in the downswing and you're trying to create more of a clearing and more of an extensional move through the ball, then if you're not creating enough in that backswing position, it's just never going to happen. You're like the sprinter who's trying to learn how to get out the block quicker, but instead of pushing into it, you're just standing there with your hands on your shoulders. It's like, it won't work. So that's it. Hopefully enjoy the video. Next week, we're going to be progressing into the downswing. Got some good topics of discussion, from what should be the first move in the downswing, and some good feelings and drills as well. So make sure you join us for that. Press the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Little bell icon as well means you receive notifications every time a new video comes out. See you guys again really soon.